You never truly understand loneliness until you're 16 years old, clutching a cold cup of coffee, watching your parents' car vanish down the highway, and realizing they're not coming back. That day started like any other summer morning. I was sprawled in the back seat, eyes half closed, the muffled hum of my old iPod barely drowning out my parents' hushed arguments in the front. We'd just visited my sister Sarah at college, a 4-hour drive home ahead of us. The car jerked slightly as Dad pulled off the highway into a remote gas station, tires crunching against gravel. "Ethan, go get me a coffee," Dad barked, eyes fixed firmly ahead, refusing to glance back at me. I sighed, stumbling from the car, stretching under the heat of the July sun. Inside the gas station, the cashier took forever brewing a fresh pot. I could see Dad impatiently drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. Finally, holding the steaming cup, I stepped outside, but the car was gone. At first, confusion froze me in place. My eyes scanned the parking lot, expecting to see them parked at a different pump. Then my phone buzzed, Mom's text flashing on the screen. "Consider this another lesson in problem solving. Good luck, sweetie." My hands shook. I called repeatedly, straight to voicemail. Another text pinged through. "Don't call. Figure it out yourself." Something inside me cracked wide open. I stared down at the phone, heart hammering against my ribs, the summer heat suddenly suffocating. My parents had played tough love games before, but leaving me stranded miles from home, this was a line they'd never crossed. I was 16, stuck in the middle of nowhere, holding a cup of coffee I didn't even drink, with only a handful of cash and an iPod in my pocket. As minutes ticked by, standing alone in that dusty lot, the truth became painfully clear. My parents hadn't just driven away, they'd finally pushed me too far. Suddenly, a wave of anger flooded through me, raw and powerful. The coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering at my feet. I knew in that moment I would never go home again. I'd find my own way, no matter how terrifying or uncertain it felt. With trembling fingers, I dialed the only number I trusted, my Aunt Rachel, who had always been an outsider in our family. She answered on the second ring, her voice soothing, reliable, and unwavering. "I'm here, Ethan. Where are you?" I looked down the deserted highway, dust blowing across empty asphalt, feeling more lost, yet more certain than I'd ever felt in my entire life. "I need your help, Aunt Rachel," I whispered, voice shaking but clear. "I'm done pretending everything is okay." Standing there by the dusty roadside, hearing Aunt Rachel's steady breathing on the other end of the line, I felt something shift within me, fear mixing with relief, and beneath it all, a spark of determination. "Where exactly are you, Ethan?" Rachel asked, her voice gentle but firm. She didn't question my decision, didn't scold or belittle. Her calmness made my throat tighten with gratitude. "I'm at a gas station off I-95, somewhere south of Hartford," I said, glancing at the faded sign swinging lazily in the wind. A long pause hung on the line, and for a second, I wondered if I'd pushed too far, asked too much. "Stay right there. I'll figure something out," she replied firmly. The call disconnected, leaving me in sudden silence. My legs trembled, and exhaustion hit me like a wave. I sank onto the curb, the rough concrete scraping my palms. The afternoon heat simmered around me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to truly feel the weight of everything that had just happened. My parents hadn't just abandoned me at a gas station, they'd abandoned the illusion that I mattered at all. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated again, snapping me back to reality. It was Rachel, her voice now filled with determination. "I called a local taxi. It'll take you to a bus station nearby. I already bought your ticket online. You're coming to me." Relief washed over me. "Thank you," I whispered. She sighed softly on the other end, compassion filling the silence. "Ethan, sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart." Minutes later, an old taxi pulled up, tires crunching gravel. I climbed in, my hands still trembling, heart racing with adrenaline and fear. As we drove toward the bus station, trees and buildings blurred by outside my window, I felt strangely detached, as if leaving behind not just a place, but a version of myself I'd always pretended to be. In the taxi, my phone buzzed relentlessly with texts and voicemails from my parents, shifting rapidly from annoyance to anger. I turned it off completely, the screen going dark in my hand, the silence strangely comforting. At the bus station, I handed the cashier nearly all of my summer savings in exchange for a ticket. As I stepped onto the bus, the cool air-conditioned interior wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. Sliding into a seat near the back, my head leaned against the cool window glass, the passing scenery blurring into a dreamlike haze. In those quiet hours, as miles stretched between me and my old life, I thought about all the times I'd stayed quiet, accepting the hurt, smiling through silent pain. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened glass, a boy tired of being invisible, tired of sacrificing pieces of himself for approval that never came. As the bus sped down the highway, carrying me toward a future filled with uncertainty, I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the seat, and finally allowed myself to breathe deeply. That day marked the beginning, not just of my independence, but of finally learning what real love looked like. Not conditional, not cruel, but patient, steady, and unwavering. I didn't know it then, but this painful decision was the very first step towards discovering who I truly was and who I refused to ever be again. 20 years passed faster than I ever imagined. Life moved on, quietly, steadily, like a river flowing downstream. I truly believe the ghosts of my past had been buried beneath years of building a new life, brick by brick, memory by memory. I'd married Emma, a kind, gentle woman who knew all my wounds yet chose to heal them with patience. Together, we had two incredible children, Oliver and Mia, whose laughter filled our cozy home, and whose lives I promised never to overshadow with bitter lessons disguised as love. Then, one ordinary Wednesday morning, while sitting at my office desk sorting through blueprints for a new apartment complex, the phone rang sharply. A number flashed across the screen, familiar yet strangely ominous. My chest tightened instantly. "Hello?" My voice sounded guarded, even to me. "Ethan, it's me, your father." The voice crackled slightly, weathered by age, uncertain, but unmistakably him. An awkward silence stretched between us, heavy with 20 years of unspoken words. I noticed my hand trembling slightly, gripping the phone harder to steady myself. "Dad, what do you want?" My voice was firmer than I expected. He cleared his throat, uneasy. "Son, things are difficult right now. We're in trouble. The bank, they're foreclosing on the house. Your mother and I, we need your help." His words pierced me, but what truly hurt was how casually he spoke, as if the decades of absence between us were just a minor inconvenience. I saw flashes of that gas station again, smelled the coffee in my hands, felt the suffocating heat, and his cold abandonment. "You haven't changed at all, have you?" I whispered bitterly, more to myself than to him. "Ethan, please," he continued, his tone shifting now, desperate yet manipulative. "We're family. You're our only hope." "Family?" I laughed softly, the bitterness surprising even myself. Family wouldn't leave their kid alone on the side of the road and call it a lesson. The line grew silent. For a moment, I wondered if he felt regret, genuine regret, or simply frustration that his plan wasn't working. Finally, he spoke, softer this time, almost pleading. "Ethan, you can hold on to your grudges forever, or you can move past them. All we're asking is a little help. Surely you understand." "Dad," I said, voice shaking slightly with a mix of anger and sadness, "do you even understand what you did to me?" Again, silence. This time, he ended the call without answering my question. His inability to acknowledge the past left a hollow ache inside me. I placed my phone down slowly, exhaling deeply. My fingers trembled, and I noticed my reflection in the window, eyes tired, older than I remembered. Despite all I'd built, all I'd overcome, that brief conversation had transported me right back to being 16. Vulnerable, helpless, desperately trying to prove myself worthy of a love that never came. Emma walked in softly, sensing my tension immediately. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, her eyes searching mine with quiet understanding. "Your parents?" she asked gently, already knowing the answer. I nodded silently, staring into nothing. Emma didn't push. She simply took my hand and squeezed gently. Her quiet support steadied my nerves. Later that night, as our kids slept peacefully down the hall, I lay awake, haunted by memories I'd long tried to forget. I knew exactly why my parents had reached out. They needed a savior. But this time, I had my own family to protect, a new generation who deserved better. Yet even knowing this, guilt gnawed at me. Was walking away strength or cruelty? Could I truly cut off the people who had given me life, even after everything they had done? I wrestled with these questions until dawn broke softly through the curtains. As sunlight warmed my face, clarity settled firmly into my heart. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but this time, the decision was mine alone. No longer the frightened boy at the gas station, but a grown man who knew exactly where his boundaries lay. I decided that morning, whatever came next, I would face it head on, not with bitterness, but with truth and courage. And perhaps in doing so, I'd finally find the peace I'd spent a lifetime searching for. I thought clarity would make things easier, but sometimes seeing the truth clearly only reveals how deep the wounds truly are. 2 days after the call from my father, I was sitting at my office desk, mindlessly flipping through paperwork when the receptionist, Katie, peeked inside, her eyes wide with concern. "Ethan," she whispered nervously, "there's an older couple here insisting they're your parents. Do you want me to tell them you're busy?" My heart jolted in my chest. Despite my resolve, my palms turned clammy, anxiety spiraling quickly through my veins. But I steadied my breathing, looked at her calmly, and nodded. "It's okay, send them in." She left, and I briefly closed my eyes, gathering the strength I'd rehearsed so many times but had rarely truly felt. I'd built skyscrapers, led construction crews, made tough business decisions, but somehow, this meeting terrified me more than any risk I'd ever faced. A knock on the glass door jolted me back to reality. There stood my parents, older, smaller somehow. Dad's shoulders were slightly hunched, his once sharp features dulled by age, worry etched deep into his face. Mom hovered behind him, nervous and frail, eyes reddened, clutching her handbag tightly. Their vulnerability surprised me, momentarily piercing my defenses. Yet as they sat across from me, the room suddenly felt colder. "You look good, Ethan," Dad began, his voice carefully gentle. Too gentle. "Thanks," I replied evenly, holding his gaze. "Let's not pretend this is a social visit. Why are you really here?" Dad hesitated, exchanging an uncomfortable glance with Mom. She cleared her throat, placing her trembling hands on my desk. "We made mistakes, Ethan," she began softly, her eyes brimming with tears. "But family should stick together in tough times. We have nowhere else to turn. You've done so well. Sure you could help your parents this once?" I watched her carefully. Her tone was soft, motherly, almost convincing. For a split second, guilt tugged sharply inside me, memories of her comforting voice when I scraped my knee or got scared at night. But behind her teary gaze, I caught a familiar gleam, one I'd learned painfully to recognize. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, do you remember why I left?" They looked away, uncomfortable silence filling the space. Dad finally cleared his throat, his voice strained. "We were just trying to teach you resilience, Ethan. Life is tough. We wanted you to be ready." "Ready?" I echoed bitterly. "Ready by abandoning me at a gas station at 16, expecting me to just magically figure it out?" Dad shifted uncomfortably, irritation flickering beneath his calm mask. "You were always sensitive. But look at you now, successful, independent. It worked, didn't it?" His casual dismissal ignited something inside me. My voice hardened. It didn't teach me resilience, it taught me not to trust. It taught me that love was conditional, transactional. Do you know how long it took me to unlearn that? My mother gasped softly, her eyes wide with shock, perhaps genuine or perhaps carefully rehearsed. "How could you say that? We raised you, fed you, clothed you. Isn't that love?" "Love isn't leaving a child alone at 16, I replied, fighting to control the quiver in my voice. "Or turning your back when things don't go your way." Dad slammed his fist on the desk, frustration boiling over. "We did our best, Ethan. How dare you judge us now when you're the one turning your back on family?" My heart raced, anger and sorrow swirling chaotically inside me. I stood slowly, my voice quiet but unwavering. Family isn't a free pass to treat someone like property. It isn't permission to manipulate and exploit. If you came here hoping to guilt me into helping you, you've wasted your time. Mom began to sob openly now, tears streaming down her face. She reached for my hand desperately, voice pleading, "Ethan, please, you're our son." I felt the familiar guilt claw at me once again, but this time, it found nowhere to grip. I'd finally accepted the painful truth. My parents weren't here out of remorse. They were here out of necessity. Their vulnerability wasn't genuine humility, it was desperation. I'll give you 1 month, I said, pulling away gently. 30 days to move out of the house. Dad's eyes darkened with disbelief. What do you mean? I bought your house from the bank, I said, voice calm, revealing what I'd carefully planned days earlier. I own it now. You have 30 days to find somewhere else. Mom stared at me in horror, her face pale. Dad opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The silence in the room was deafening. As they slowly rose from their seats, turning away without another word, I felt both relief and sadness. Watching their retreating figures, hunched and defeated, I realized something painful yet profound. This wasn't victory. It was simply the harsh reality of finally saying no to those who only knew how to take. The door shut softly behind them, and I sank back into my chair, trembling slightly. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was grief. Grief for the family we never truly were, for the childhood I'd never had, and for the painful lesson I'd learned far too late. But beneath the grief was clarity, a quiet, empowering clarity. For the first time, I'd drawn a boundary clearly, without hesitation. It hurt, yes, but it also felt right. I knew this wouldn't be the end. My parents were masters at manipulation. They'd keep fighting, twisting narratives, trying to pull me back into their toxic web. But this time I was ready to face whatever storm came next. Because now I wasn't fighting them. I was finally standing up for myself. The next morning came faster than I'd anticipated. As sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, I stood alone in my office, quietly gathering strength for the confrontation ahead. Outside the glass walls, I could see my employees working diligently, unaware of the storm about to unfold within these walls. At precisely 9:00 a.m., a sharp knock echoed on my office door, cutting through the calm morning like a knife. Katie entered cautiously, her face pale with anxiety. "They're here," she said quietly. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Send them in." My parents walked in slowly, their confidence from before visibly shaken. My father looked aged, defeated, but there was still a lingering pride in his eyes. My mother wore the same calm mask she'd perfected years ago. They seated themselves stiffly, eyes cautiously avoiding mine. "Ethan," my father began, voice softer now, almost hesitant, "I want you to reconsider." "No," I replied, keeping my voice even, calm. I made my decision clear. My mother leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle yet sharp, aimed directly at my heart. "You'd let your own parents lose everything?" "It's not my responsibility to save you," I said, feeling a quiet, unexpected sense of relief. "Not anymore." And she glanced down, fingers trembling slightly, then whispered quietly, "We didn't mean to hurt you all those years ago, Ethan. We thought we were helping." I leaned forward slightly, looking directly into her eyes. "Helping?" My voice trembled slightly. "Did it feel like help when you left me alone at a gas station? When you locked me outside in freezing weather? Did it ever occur to you how it might feel to me?" My father shifted uneasily. "We made mistakes," he murmured, struggling with the words. "We realize that now." For a moment, I hesitated. Was this genuine remorse? But then, almost instinctively, my eyes caught the slight smirk tugging at my mother's lips, barely noticeable yet chillingly familiar. The reality hit me harder than ever. They weren't truly sorry, they simply needed me again. I stood up calmly, pulling out a thick file from my drawer. They watched silently, unsure what to expect. "I bought your house through a bank auction," I began quietly, laying the documents on the desk. My father's eyes widened, disbelief replacing his calm facade. My mother's face drained of color, her confident mask finally slipping. "You did what?" Dad demanded, voice shaking. "I bought it legally. It's mine now," I said, voice steady, free from anger or bitterness. "You have 30 days to vacate." My mother gasped softly, and my father's jaw tightened. Anger surged behind his eyes, but this time it held no power over me. "You wouldn't?" Mom whispered, panic slipping into her voice. "Where will we go?" "You taught me that lessons have consequences," I replied quietly. Not with cruelty, but clarity. "Maybe it's your turn to learn one." I saw something flicker in her eyes, surprise, fear, or perhaps recognition. She finally saw me. Not the obedient son she'd shaped, but a man willing to set boundaries clearly and without hesitation. They left without another word, their footsteps echoing softly in the hallway, leaving behind a heavy silence. I sank slowly back into my chair, adrenaline leaving my body replaced by exhaustion and grief. It wasn't a joyful victory, but rather a bittersweet acknowledgement of a truth I'd spent decades avoiding. Minutes later, my phone vibrated again, this time from my sister Mia. I braced myself as I answered. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice shaky but determined. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" "I will be," I replied honestly. "For the first time in years, Mia, I feel truly free." She paused briefly before whispering, "Will I ever be able to feel that way?" My chest tightened gently, recognizing my own struggle in her voice. "Only when you're ready to stop carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with." The conversation ended quietly. Sitting there, alone in the silence, I realized clearly the true nature of healing. It wasn't about revenge, nor about inflicting pain in return. It was about having the courage to stand tall, to protect your own dignity, and to finally step beyond shadows cast by others. And yet, despite the calm clarity I'd found, I knew deep inside, this wasn't the end. My parents were still capable of pulling me into their orbit again. The real test would be in how strongly I held on to myself when they tried once more. After all, drawing a line was one thing, defending it another entirely. Just days after confronting my parents, my phone erupted with relentless notifications, angry texts, missed calls, voicemails heavy with judgment. My relatives, distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly became intensely interested in my personal life, each message dripping with accusation and disappointment. "I never thought you'd turn out to be so heartless, Ethan. You owe your parents everything. How could you forget your roots? We raised you better than this." Each message chipped away at my calm, testing the boundaries I'd just learned to set. But instead of answering immediately, I chose silence, allowing their accusations to hang unanswered in the digital void. I needed space, a chance to steady myself before deciding how to respond, if I chose to respond at all. One morning, while quietly sipping coffee in my office, the phone vibrated again. Sabrina's name lit up the screen. Hesitantly, I answered. "Ethan," her voice sounded strained, tired. "They're spreading lies about you to everyone. People think you've become selfish and arrogant." "I expected as much," I replied calmly, but inside, anger simmered dangerously. "Did you call to judge me too?" "No." She paused, then continued more softly. "I called to apologize. I was a child when everything happened, but I'm not innocent either. I've been enabling them, too scared to stand up like you did. I'm sorry." Her confession stunned me. My younger sister, whom I'd left behind, carried scars of her own. I realized then, painful as it was, that our family wasn't merely broken. We were trapped in cycles of hurt, passed down from generation to generation. "It's never too late to walk away, Sabrina," I whispered gently, meaning every word. "But what if I lose everyone?" Her voice trembled, uncertain, fearful. "You won't lose yourself," I said softly. "And maybe that's more important." We ended the call, the silence afterward thick and unsettling. For the first time since leaving home, I felt compassion, not just anger for the family I'd walked away from. My parents weren't evil, but trapped in their own unaddressed wounds. I understood clearly now that true strength wasn't in blaming or resentment, but in breaking the chain of toxicity. Determined to end the manipulation once and for all, I made a choice: transparency. Sitting alone late into the night, I carefully uploaded old voicemails, messages, and even the recorded call from that day at the gas station. Raw evidence of the emotional cruelty I'd suffered. I wrote an honest, straightforward message and sent it to every relative. "If you're going to judge me, at least know the full story." Within hours, silence replaced accusations. The harshness softened as evidence spoke louder than manipulation. My relatives, initially angry, fell quiet. Suddenly, their narratives shifted, sympathy replacing accusation, confusion replacing certainty. Yet, despite winning this small battle, a hollow sadness lingered in my chest. Releasing the truth had freed me from their accusations, but it couldn't erase years of hurt. Facing reality was painful, not victorious. A few days later, as I sat alone in my office, a knock broke my solitude. My assistant opened the door gently, eyes cautious. "There's someone here to see you. She says she's your mother." My heart raced, uncertain whether this visit would bring peace or another storm, but I nodded calmly. "Let her in." Mom stepped inside quietly, looking smaller, older, vulnerable. No pride, No arrogance this time, just a fragile, tired woman with eyes reddened from tears. She sat carefully, her voice trembled as she spoke. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she began softly, avoiding my gaze. "I just need you to know, what we did to you wasn't right." I watched her silently, wary yet strangely moved. "I grew up like you," she continued, eyes fixed on her trembling hands. "My parents taught me that love was earned, never freely given. I promised myself I'd never repeat that mistake, yet I did, without even realizing it." I felt my defenses soften, witnessing the truth behind her eyes. It didn't erase the past, but her honesty felt like an unexpected balm for wounds I'd carried silently for decades. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "Not because I need your help, but because it's true. I failed you." For the first time, I allowed my own tears to fall freely, a quiet release of years of buried pain. Yet, even through tears, I spoke clearly, resolutely. "I accept your apology, but that doesn't mean we can go back to what we were." She nodded sadly, understanding clearly the boundary I'd finally set. She rose, leaving quietly, the door closing softly behind her. As I sat alone, a profound clarity settled within me. Forgiveness wasn't about reconciliation. It was about releasing the weight I no longer wanted to carry. My mother's apology hadn't healed everything, but it showed me I wasn't the only one trapped in cycles of hurt. The fight wasn't over, and perhaps it never fully would be. But now, at least, I had begun rewriting my own story, breaking free from chains woven from generations of unresolved pain. Because the truth I'd learned through this difficult confrontation was clear and powerful. You can't control your past, but you can choose whether or not it defines your future. The morning of the demolition arrived quietly, just another chilly autumn day cloaked in soft mist. I stood at the edge of the property, hands tucked into my pockets, watching the demolition crew methodically prepare their machines. The house, my childhood home, stood empty, windows dark, garden overgrown. A bittersweet ache filled my chest. Behind me, a car door gently clicked shut. I turned slowly, already knowing who I'd find. My mother stood there quietly, wrapped in an old cardigan, her hair gently blowing in the wind. She looked small, fragile, stripped of any pride or pretense. "Can I talk to you for a moment, Ethan?" she asked softly, almost timidly. I nodded, guiding her away from the noise, toward a quiet spot beneath the maple tree I'd climbed as a kid. Its leaves, golden and orange in the autumn chill, rustled softly above us. We stood silently, the tension heavy, but no longer hostile. "You know," she began, voice trembling, "when I was a child, my father used to punish me by leaving me alone in dark rooms. He called it character building." I turned to look at her, shocked. She had never shared this before. Vulnerability wasn't her style. "I promised myself," she continued softly, "I'd never be that kind of parent. Yet I did exactly that to you, maybe worse." Her words lingered between us, raw and painful. Tears slid quietly down her face, genuine and unforced. I realized in that moment she wasn't trying to manipulate me, not this time. She was finally revealing herself. Broken, flawed, deeply human. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Ethan," she whispered softly. "I just need you to understand. Pain, once passed down, continues until someone chooses to stop it." I felt the walls I'd built around my heart begin to soften. The anger, once sharp and powerful, now felt distant and faded. Yet I knew clearly forgiveness didn't mean allowing old patterns back into my life. "I understand," I replied quietly, gently, "but understanding doesn't erase the scars." She nodded slowly, accepting the boundary I'd firmly drawn. "I never thought about what we did to you until we needed you. I'm sorry for that too." Around us, leaves drifted silently to the ground, each one a quiet symbol of something falling away. Hurt, resentment, illusions we'd both held onto for far too long. A construction worker called out to me, signaling that they were ready to start. My mother turned slightly, looking one last time at the house behind me. Her voice was faint, almost lost in the autumn wind. "Goodbye, Ethan." "Goodbye, Mom," I whispered back. I watched her slowly walk away, her figure disappearing into the morning fog. A part of me felt lighter, the heaviness easing gently with each step she took away. Yet an ache remained, not of bitterness, but of mourning what could have been. a sharp engine roar snapped me from my thoughts. The bulldozer started moving forward, steady and powerful. The old wooden walls, where I'd hidden my tears and silent prayers, began to crumble, reduced to dust and rubble. Yet, as the walls fell, I didn't feel victory or revenge, only quiet relief. Watching the house come down, I realized clearly what Aunt Rachel had taught me years ago. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, nor is it allowing hurt to continue. Forgiveness means choosing peace over bitterness, boundaries over manipulation. I turned away, leaving behind the crumbling house and all the memories trapped within its walls. The past could no longer define me, and I knew deeply that healing wouldn't happen overnight. It was a continuous process, a journey I'd just begun. And as I walked forward, my steps steady on the gravel driveway, I felt for the first time not lost or abandoned, but genuinely, unshakably free. In the weeks that followed, I focused my energy entirely on transforming that old property into something meaningful, something I hoped would break the cycle of pain for others, just as I was trying to do myself. Construction began swiftly, turning empty land and broken memories into foundations of hope. The affordable housing project named Rachel's Haven slowly took shape. Each brick placed felt symbolic, each wall raised like a quiet act of healing. Yet even as I worked to build something new, the shadows of my past lingered. My phone still occasionally buzzed with texts from distant relatives, awkward attempts at reconnecting, apologies mixed with explanations. Sometimes I'd read them and feel a pang of old bitterness, but mostly I simply let them fade quietly into silence. One chilly December evening, as I was reviewing building plans in my office, a knock interrupted my thoughts. Sabrina stood at my doorway, bundled in a thick coat, breath visible in the frosty air. Her eyes hesitated, unsure yet hopeful. "Hey, Ethan," she began softly. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded, setting the papers aside. "Always." She stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her, fingers nervously twisting a thin bracelet around her wrist. For a moment, we both stood in uncertain silence. "I left," she finally said, voice quivering slightly but clear. "What do you mean?" "Mom and Dad," she continued, eyes fixed firmly on mine, determination flickering behind the tears. "I couldn't do it anymore, couldn't pretend their way was normal. After seeing how strong you've become, how you stood up to them, I knew I could do it too." My heart tightened, both relieved and saddened. I moved toward her slowly, gently placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, Sabrina. It won't be easy, but you're not alone." She smiled weakly, nodding slowly as tears filled her eyes. "I thought leaving would fix everything, but now what? How do you start over?" I sighed gently, recognizing my younger self in her frightened expression. "Honestly, you don't just start over, you rebuild piece by piece. It's painful, messy, and it takes time, but eventually it gets easier." She nodded, wiping her tears, eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever regret leaving?" I hesitated, looking out through the window at the falling snow gently blanketing the city. Memories drifted softly through my mind: the gas station, Aunt Rachel's embrace, the years of struggle and triumph, each decision shaping who I'd become. "No," I said quietly with conviction. "I don't regret leaving. I only regret waiting so long." We sat quietly together for a while, comforted by each other's presence. Healing wasn't instantaneous, nor was it neat or perfect. It came in small steps, gentle moments of courage, choices that felt terrifying yet necessary, but it was always worth it. Months passed, and Lola's Haven opened its doors, safe, affordable housing dedicated to families facing hardship. At the opening ceremony, I stood before the gathered crowd, feeling both pride and humility. "This place," I said clearly, my voice echoing softly through the speakers, "isn't just about providing shelter. It's about breaking patterns, about understanding our worth enough to build a life we genuinely deserve. It's about choosing healing over bitterness, strength over silence." Applause erupted around me, warmth spreading through my chest. As I stepped off stage, a familiar figure caught my attention, a quiet woman standing alone near the back, my mother. She gave a small nod of acknowledgement. No words exchanged, no grand reunion, just silent acceptance from a distance. It wasn't the perfect ending I'd once imagined. Our wounds ran too deep for easy resolutions. But standing there, amidst the applause and hopeful faces, I understood clearly that healing wasn't linear or perfect. It was messy, complicated, and ongoing. Later that night, as I watched families moving joyfully into Lola's Haven, laughter and warmth filling the hallways, I felt a quiet certainty settle deep in my heart. I'd finally found the strength to define my own value, not by what others expected, but by how I chose to live. Life wasn't perfect, nor did I expect it to be. Yet for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely content. At peace, not because everything had been resolved, but because I'd finally learned how to stand firm in my truth, and maybe after everything, that was enough.